Hello and welcome back to the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast. I'm your host, Meg Carney, and I'm an outdoor and environmental writer and author of the book, Outdoor Minimalist: Waste Less Hiking, Camping, and Backpacking. Follow the link in the description to pre-order a copy of the book so you'll be the first to receive it on the release date of September 1st, 2022. The Outdoor Minimalist Podcast has a goal to give listeners actionable ways to waste less hiking, camping, backpacking, and more during every step of the process. Your impact outdoors starts long before you hit the trail and goes beyond leave no trace ethics. You'll learn how to identify sustainable outdoor brands, how to ask hard questions regarding sustainability, and begin to shift and evolve your mindset to integrate minimalism into all of your outdoor pursuits. In episode 39 of the Outdoor Minimalist Podcast, we get to talk about eating insects. Well, I'd love to do an episode on insect proteins in the human diet, which, by the way, if you know anyone that could chat about that, please let me know. Today, we are going to focus on insect proteins, our pets, and the planet. There's a lot to be said about dog nutrition and the impact our pets' diets have on the environment, not to mention their health. To help make this topic a bit more palatable, I had the pleasure of chatting with Wesley Cooper, the co-founder of Neobites. Neobites is a company on a mission to accelerate and shift towards sustainable animal nutrition through insect protein. Neobites is a product of Wesley's desire to play a pivotal role in the fight against climate change. During his time working in the food and beverage industry in New York City, his lifelong passion for sustainability led him to learn more about the climate impact of our chosen protein sources. It was during this time he was introduced to insect protein, and Neobites came to fruition shortly after. Before we get to the interview, I have a few announcements about Outdoor Minimalist. First, the book is still set to be released on September 1st, 2022, and if you haven't already, head over to theoutdoorminimalist.com to pre-order a copy today. Some listeners may know that I also took a new job writing for Field & Stream at the end of February. With that switch from freelancing to full-time work, I am having to make some changes to the podcast itself and kind of how we're running things. Luckily, I have an amazing and talented brother that is now helping me edit episodes, so we will still be releasing new episodes every Monday. However, I will be shutting down the Patreon, at least for now. I was super excited to have this Patreon at the beginning of the year, but that was before I had this new job, and my schedule has really shifted with the time I'm able to dedicate to creating bonus content for all of the patrons. And I just want to make sure that if there are people paying for content and to support the show, that they are really getting impactful content and things that I wanted and planned. That said, I'm going to swap the Patreon out for a different kind of listener support, so if you still would like to support the Outdoor Minimalist mission, I'm going to be adding a few different ways that you can donate monetarily. And if you don't want to donate monetarily or you just can't right now, that's totally fine. A few ways that you can still support the show is by leaving a review. You can message me feedback on Instagram or send me an email. And better yet, share an episode on your social media so your network can see it too. Creating and growing this podcast has been really amazing. I've been learning a lot, and it's been great to see how the Outdoor Minimalist mission has been reaching the outdoor industry and our community as a whole. Every little bit that you can offer us helps, and I'm just excited that we can continue to grow and create this content together. Supercharge your pup's mealtime with Neobites functional dog food toppers. Neobites unlocks the unique power of cricket protein to promote firm poops, a thick and shiny coat, and everyday vitality for your dog. With a powder format, these toppers can easily be mixed into existing foods to make mealtime more exciting. Cricket, a hypoallergenic and humane protein, is not only better for your dog, but it's better for the planet too, producing virtually no greenhouse gases and using fractions of the resources used for traditional proteins. Check out Neobites products on Amazon or at eatneobites.com. Use the discount code CRICKET15 for 15% off your first order. And if you and your dog love it, use the code Outdoor Minimalist for 10% off every order. Well, welcome to the show, Wesley. I'm really excited to have you join me today. And I know that you're an expert in all things insect proteins, which is really exciting to me. But before we get to that, I am just kind of curious how outdoor recreation fits into your life and the types of things that you like to do outside.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thanks for having me, Meg. Really excited to chat. Um, Outdoor recreation. So I grew up here in Austin, Texas, and um, spent a lot of time outdoors. I was in the Boy Scouts. I'm an Eagle Scout, and went camping and hiking and did all kinds of things. I love skiing. It's a big part of my life still.
Cool. And that's not necessarily like a part of your career, you would say. Have you ever worked in the outdoor industry at all?
Correct. No. So after I graduated high school, obviously I was out of Boy Scouts at that point. I ended up moving up to Northeast, and so I spent some time in New York City, which is the opposite of outdoors. But I'm back in Austin now, and I'm much happier to have nature so close again. But I've never worked for any outdoor job.
Awesome. Yeah. Okay. So now, after the move from New York City to Austin, now you're the co-founder of a company called Neobites. And so, can you tell us a little bit more about that company, how it all started, and its general mission?
Sure, yeah. So I've had a long time passion for sustainability, and I've always wanted to play a role in fighting climate change. And when I began my career, I was in the food and beverage industry up in New York, working for different players in the CPG beverage space, like Vita Coco, and then I bounced over to some energy drink companies. But I always wanted to start a company, and I always knew that I wanted to play a role in fighting climate change. And I was attending all these trade shows for the beverage company I was working for, and I came across cricket protein for human consumption at several of them. And once I learned more about the benefits nutritionally, but also environmentally, everything clicked for me and I became enamored and I dove in. And when I dove in, it was purely around a passion for enacting change. And I had no idea of the true market opportunity for getting involved in the insect protein space. I began playing around with cricket protein and recipes, all on the human side initially. And then when it became clear the psychological barrier for humans was just far too great, no one in the Western world was ready to eat insects at the scale that it would need to be truly impactful. I started looking for other industries to apply insect protein, and the pet food industry popped up. Actually, I can tell you the true origin story of how I pivoted over to pet food. I was on the subway in New York City and I saw an ad for a fresh dog food brand. And I remember remarking at how nutritious it was, but I was at this point really involved in the sustainable protein space. And the biggest point to me was that it was clearly much more unsustainable because they were competing with the human grade protein industry. So that drew my attention to the pet food industry as a potential application. And so I then began testing a hypothesis. Would dogs like the taste of insects? And then would the psychological barrier be lower for the pet food industry? And dogs absolutely devoured insects. It was fascinating. I had no idea. It could have been 50-50. So prove that correct. And then psychological barrier was definitely less of an issue. Pet parents, we've learned over the time in Neobites that they care primarily about their dog's health, which makes complete sense. Sustainability was just a nice to have. And so that's the beauty of insects, is they're an incredibly nutritious source of protein. And so it became very clear that there was potential here.
That's really interesting. I feel like that's how a lot of ideas kind of come to light, is you have kind of this aha moment like you did, and then you can kind of start to explore those new avenues. But when did Neobites officially form?
Yeah, so Neobites as a company and under the name Neobites started in, I think, February of 2019. No, I'm sorry, 2020. And pivoted over to pet food that spring right before COVID. And then I moved back to Austin and launched the company officially that July of 2020. So we've been operating for coming up on 2 years now, which is actually pretty crazy.
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm kind of curious to hear the specific mission, because I feel like you kind of summarized it through explaining how you came up with the idea and why you pursued it. But what, if you were to tell someone, is the mission of Neobites, what would that be?
Yeah, so our mission as it stands, Actually, our old mission was to say the two things humans can't live without: pets and planet Earth. And that's kind of changed over the years of operation. And it's now, we're on a mission to accelerate the shift towards sustainable animal nutrition through insect protein. So obviously, our first mission still stands, but we've kind of refined that to target animal nutrition and using insect protein as our North Star.
Yeah, it does feel a little bit more specific, this new mission.
Yeah.
So easier for consumers to be like, oh, okay, this is exactly what they're doing. That's awesome.
Yeah.
So when I think of sustainable proteins, I will say that insect proteins have come up a time or two when I'm talking to people, but the most common that I'm aware of is plant protein. So a lot of people always talk about plant protein, being plant-based, all that jazz. And there are even some plant protein-based dog foods on the market that seem to be doing a decent job of fulfilling the nutritional needs for our dogs. So my question, I guess, is why did you pursue insect protein versus plant protein in the sustainability realm?
Yeah, sure. That's a great question, and also the source for a massive debate in the pet food industry over whether dogs specifically are omnivores or carnivores. And truthfully, we try to avoid that like the plague. There's no proof either way. Just what it comes down to is what you personally believe. But by and large, majority of people believe that dogs need a source of animal protein. And insects are a source of animal protein. And so we're checking the box and avoiding that very dangerous debate. And what excited me about insect protein over plant proteins is insect protein is a complete protein source. So it has every essential amino acid that dogs need. Whereas plant proteins, you need a bunch of different supplements to complete the amino profile. Pound for pound, insects are truly one of the most nutritious sources of animal protein. They have more omega-3s than salmon. They even have a naturally occurring prebiotic, which is great for gut health. No other animal protein has a prebiotic in it naturally. And in terms of convincing vegetarian or vegan dog parents who are on the fence about what to feed their dogs, insects are a humane source of protein. So they live a full life for the few months that they're alive, and then they're dipped into hibernation before being roasted and milled into a powder. And so they don't feel any pain by being dipped into hibernation when they're put in a freezer. And for the vegetarians and vegans that are in it for environmental reasons, obviously that's what got me most excited about insect protein. They produce virtually no methane or greenhouse gases, and they require fractions of the land, feed, and water to produce the same weight of protein. So that they're truly the future of protein, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, I have seen a lot bigger of a push towards insects, even on the human side. But like you said, there is kind of that psychological barrier. So it makes sense to kind of pursue that in the pet food industry because it does have a really huge impact. And it is also really interesting to hear you talk about the vegan and vegetarian pet owners because I'm also vegan and that's been kind of a dilemma for me. But I didn't necessarily know a lot about how insects are processed, I guess. So that was a fun fact to learn.
Yeah, there's no legs or antennas in anything we get. The farmers we work with produce a powder, and it comes to us. It looks like a protein powder, and it honestly it just smells like it's nutty. It doesn't have any gross smell or any characteristic about it.
Earlier, you mentioned cricket protein specifically. Is that a type of insect that is known to have the best health benefits for people and dogs, or are there other types of insects that you use?
Yeah, so we started with crickets because that was the insect protein that I was introduced to. I didn't do any research at the time. That was what the Western world was accepting was crickets. It still is the insect that is most accepted from a yuck factor standpoint. It's the least gross insect. But there are so many others. There are thousands of edible insects. Black soldier fly larva is one that we have begun using in our products. Mealworms are not something we use, but they're also a growing protein source in the animal feed and pet food world. You see ants in certain interior Mexican cuisines. From a health perspective, they're all fairly comparable. Some have a higher fatty acid profile, etc., but they're all very close in nutritional benefits. That's what's beautiful about them is there's so many of them that the industry is truly scalable economically, and the environmental and health benefits are pretty much the same across the board.
That's awesome. And I'm about to ask kind of a broad question, and you touched on a few aspects of it earlier, but a lot of dog food specifically, I mean, it uses the same animals that a lot of humans consume, I guess. So things like beef, chicken, turkey, and then sometimes lamb, I guess. I haven't seen that a bit more. And then all types of fish. There are those novel proteins that I have been seeing pop up here and there, like quail, more like game type things, rabbit as well. But when you're comparing all of these different types of protein, can we talk a little bit more specifically about the environmental impacts of those types of protein in comparison to plants as well as insects? I think you did a good job kind of talking about the health things, and you can throw that in here and there, but I'm more so looking at the environmental side now.
Sure, yeah. Looking at purely greenhouse gases, beef produces just an insane amount of greenhouse gases. They're 36%. Sorry, the livestock industry in general produces more than a third of total US methane emissions. Methane is greenhouse gas 10 plus times stronger than CO2 at warming the planet. Insects and crickets produce virtually no greenhouse gases. It's not even near comparable. In terms of resources, I can list off actual figures. Water needed to produce 1 kilogram of protein. Beef protein, it's 22,000 liters to produce 1 kilogram of beef protein. Crickets require 2 liters to produce the same. Feed is the same thing. Beef requires about 10 times as much feed to produce the same amount of protein. And then land is another one, about 150 times that of insects. And we can go further there. The percentage of edible weight for these protein sources, you can only eat about 40% of the cow. Crickets are 100%. There's no waste involved. And in terms of the farming process of these protein sources, there's obviously terrible agricultural practices for these chosen protein sources that we have in the Western world, whereas insects basically operate on a circular economy. They can live off of food waste. They themselves are a food source. And then their waste is called frass. And it's just an incredibly nutrient dense soil that's great for composting and fertilizer. So just comparing agricultural industry to agricultural industry, they're not even comparable.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah.
It seems like, I mean, in a lot of different environmental spheres, when we're talking about animal agriculture, the largest comparison we usually use is for beef, which I think is important to note because people eat a lot of beef, or animals eat a lot of beef. And I think it is the one that produces the most harm, I guess, or creates the most harm environmentally speaking.
Right. Right.
But then I feel like a lot of people, when they're kind of starting to like gradually make the switch away from beef, whether it's in their life or in their animal or their pets' lives, then they start to switch to things like chicken and turkey. Mm-hmm. So do you have any thoughts on how that compares?
Yeah, I mean, it is truly the lesser evil, chicken and turkey and pork even, but they are still way more resource intensive to produce than insects. I think water is probably the most resource intensive piece of the production process. Chicken requires 2,300 liters to produce 1 kilogram of protein, whereas, like I said before, it's just 2 liters to produce a kilogram of crickets. And so compared to beef, yeah, chicken, pork, and turkey, way better. But compared to insects, it's, again, just not comparable. But the most like wow factor figure is definitely comparing beef to insects.
And in general, switching gears a little bit, when I think of pet food, a lot of times we think about kibble because kibble, it's the most accessible, it's usually the most affordable, and it's kind of the easiest to feed our dogs. And in those kibbles, there's a lot of different ingredients, which can be confusing. There's a lot of debate on the health of all these different things, including carbohydrates, not just the proteins. But when we're looking at the kibble itself, would you be able to weigh in a little bit on kind of the health concerns with that kibble, whether it's how that's processed or even the type of meat that's being put in there, like meat meal, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. This is one of my favorite dinner conversations, honestly. When I got involved in the pet food industry, the more I learned about what is really in our pets' food just baffled me. I can list off the many problems here. I'll start with the way it's processed. So traditional kibble is cooked at a really high temperature. It introduces carcinogenic compounds. They're known to cause cancer. These compounds are fine in small amounts. Compare it to our breakfast cereal. It goes through the same process, an extrusion process. But when it's what you consume twice a day for your entire life, it's clearly a ticking time bomb. before your pet develops some sort of health issue related to it. Dog cancer rates are really high. This is one of the things that frustrates me probably most about our industry is cancer rates are not something that's been tracked over time. And so professionals who are trying to cover up these stats always point to the fact that there's no proof that they've been rising because they haven't been tracked. But when dog cancer rates are so high and the food we've been feeding them for the past 50 years is this highly processed kibble, it's pretty clear what the problem is. Moving on to the ingredients, by and large, traditional kibbles are packed with cheap fillers, sometimes even artificial preservatives. 4D meat is probably like the biggest thing I can point to here as the problem. 4D meat stands for dead, dying, diseased, or downed. This can literally include roadkill, carcasses left over from the human meat processing plants, dead zoo animals, etc. It's awful. And it's considered unfit for human consumption, rightfully so, but it's been given the green light in pet food. And people don't really understand what they're feeding their pets. And with all of these factors lined up, it's just mind-boggling to know that people are actually feeding this to their animals. The fresh food market has obviously been growing with companies like the Farmer's Dog. They're doing a great job at solving the health problems in the industry, but they're pretty inconvenient. They're messy. They're really expensive. And then on top of that, they're obviously really unsustainable because they're using human protein sources. There's a growing offering of gently cooked and dehydrated dog foods that I'm a pretty big fan of. I actually feed my dog one of those right now because Neobites doesn't currently offer a full daily food. And we will do something along those lines down the line when we do release a food.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to unpack when it comes to dog food. But there are a couple other questions I had about certain ingredients. And if you can't answer them, then that's okay. But I feel like you're the most likely to know.
Sure. Let's do it.
So something that I think has kind of started to change. Well, first of all, it seems like pet food is not nearly as regulated as human food, right? Like the regulations are different, the health codes are different, all of that jazz.
Yeah.
You talked a little bit about the dead and down meat and stuff like that, but previously, I don't think this is happening anymore. At least I hope not, but I have heard before that some dog foods were recalled or they had to change the recipes and stuff like that because they had been using euthanized animals. Mm-hmm. And then like that drug was going into the food and making dogs sometimes die. Is that real?
Yes, that's kind of what drew the attention to 4D meat that came along with, the roadkill and dead zoo animals. It just found its way into the mix. And the industry is horribly regulated. I'll call out the FDA here. It's recall ridden. There's only a handful of manufacturers. So like Purina and Blue Buffalo share facilities, manufacturers. And if one line is recalled, chances are another line has been tested as well and went undetected. And so there will be those who defend the pet food industry and call it not recall ridden. But if it happened at the scale that it does in the pet food industry and the human side, it would be international news at how horrible it is. So yeah, that is real, but the euthanized piece is not as common.
Yeah, I didn't think so.
Yeah.
I think that was maybe just like more of like a sensational story, I think, in comparison to the other recalls that were happening. And then I definitely got into the habit when I became plant-based, like reading my own food ingredients a lot more closely. And then I started doing the same for my dogs. Mm-hmm. And I do believe that dog foods list the ingredients according to the amount of like the actual weight of that food. So if they list like, say, beef first, then like by weight, technically that is supposed to be the number one ingredient. But then I'll often see them list several types of grains after. So I'm trying to think of an example. So you could do like brown rice and then rice bran and then another, like, I don't know, maybe white rice or something like that, but it's all rice, right? But it's listed 3 times. So then technically the rice is the number one ingredient. So they're kind of like splitting things up really confusingly. So do you have any tips for like reading pet food ingredients, like number one things to look for?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. The science behind the marketing of pet food is sad. Obviously, profit comes first for a lot of these companies. And yeah, that they can split up different types of one ingredient and get around that to pack it with fillers rather than actual nutrition. I think my tips for dog owners is really just get familiar with what's actually inside. I bet if you read the back of your dog's food, if it's a traditional kibble, you wouldn't fully grasp what you're actually giving your dog. I bet there are a majority of ingredients in there that you're confused about. And my advice to that is just run the other way. Wait for Neobites to launch a food if you can't find something else, because it's pretty standard across the entire industry. It's just common practice. Fill the kibble with fillers and on the front of the bag say chicken, number one ingredient. I think that's probably my unfortunate best tip I could give.
Well, it is good just to be more in the know and have more awareness about those things, because I think until people are more aware of those specific issues and what exactly is going into the food, then they can't really make those changes. So right now, Neobites, you guys make a couple different food toppers and also treats. The food toppers are great, by the way. One of my huskies is really kind of picky and it makes him want to eat his food more.
Nice.
But was the intention behind adding those food toppers to add them on top of things like kibble to kind of boost the nutritional value?
Yeah, exactly. So we started with the treats in July of 2020 to introduce insect protein into the consumer's mind. And then we did have a food shortly after that. And that's when we learned very quickly just how hard it is to convince people to leave this super sticky product that they've been feeding their dog and their parents probably fed their dogs. These big kibble companies have done a great job at keeping customers on board. It's a really big challenge for startups like Neobites to earn their trust and win their business over. And so the toppers were a decision we made to, yes, to your point, boost the nutrition of the typical dog diet through these traditional kibbles while introducing insect protein, and then also work into the consumer's daily habits so that they can physically see the benefits from insects, whether it makes your husky more excited at mealtime. That's awesome. Hopefully you'll start seeing some true physical health benefits too. We've had some amazing feedback on dog skin and coat after being on our toppers for a while. There's a growing number of breeds out there that have just insane digestive issues, and our digestive aid topper has been a big solution for those dogs, and it's been really amazing to see. So sorry, I derailed the question, but we are building to have a food in the future that captures all of the benefits of insect protein and whole food ingredients and is processed in a gentle way that won't introduce these carcinogens.
Yeah, that's great. And something that I had already been doing and that I'm kind of phasing out now that I use the Neobites topper is I was adding like a fish oil of some kind to the top because I know that omegas are really beneficial. And you kind of mentioned that earlier. And I think that specifically makes me more on board with insect proteins, I guess, because a lot of times we do think, well, it's either just fish or I guess kelp that you're going to be able to get omegas from that. But from my understanding, from what you've been saying, is that insects also have those.
Yeah, exactly. They are packed full of omega-3s primarily, but they also have a great omega-6 profile as well. And that's obviously super beneficial for skin and coat, but it's also great for brain development, immune system, etc. And yeah, the common knowledge is fish oil, but it can give dogs bad breath. It's also just not as sustainable. And pound for pound, like I said, insects just have more omega-3s.
Okay, so I have another question. In general, I mean, you've talked really in depth about the general environmental impacts and how insect protein is a lot better than other animal proteins. But then in other parts of your processing, when you're making the treats and the toppers, how do you kind of manage the impact of production in general?
Yeah, great question. So we made the conscious decision to own our production process. So everything is made in small batches here in Austin, Texas. And that gives us a lot of oversight and control. There isn't waste. There's not a lot of transportation from facility to fulfillment center to store to the end customer's home. Everything is made, packed, and fulfilled right here in our facility. And so there's no waste. For a while, all of our products were more or less made to order. We don't sit on a lot of inventory. And we're actually America's first carbon negative pet food company. That means a lot to some people. To others, it just doesn't matter. But that was part of our internal mission to be as sustainable as possible and work towards operating within a circular economy. So we have an amazing partner who is facilitating our carbon negative status and has connected us to a couple partners who we offset through. But that's really made possible through our use of insect protein. And we also use post-consumer recycled packaging, plastic still, but we are working to improve that and switch over to an aluminum or a glass potential option later too.
Wow, that's really cool. Yeah, I think being climate negative is really awesome. And if people aren't really sure what being climate negative is, you can go back to one of my older episodes. It's called What Does Being Climate Neutral Mean? And it's with the CEO of Climate Neutral. So he talks all about what that actually means and how companies like Neobites achieve that. But before I guess we kind of wrap things up, what are any other last little tidbits or advice that you have for pet parents that are looking to improve their dog's health as well as lower their pet's environmental footprint?
Yeah, educate yourself on what's actually in the food. If you're curious about an ingredient, Google it. Chances are it's probably not good if it's in a traditional kibble. And in terms of environmental impact, I think holding the companies that you choose to purchase from accountable is probably my biggest recommendation. We are taking it upon ourselves to do that despite our customers asking for it. But I would say majority of pet food companies out there are putting profit first, unfortunately, and pets' health and the planet's health are definitely taking a backseat, which is extremely unfortunate. And so I was just really transparent. We're using plastic bags, but we're working to move away from those, even though it's going to be more expensive for us. And so I think just challenging the companies you purchase from to do better is probably my biggest tip.
Yeah, and I think that the mention of the plastic bags is a good one because oftentimes it's easy to fixate on like the packaging of certain materials, but I think especially when it comes to things like food that we're eating or that our pets are eating, a lot of times the actual impact of the ingredients of those foods is higher than the packaging itself. So there's like pros and cons. Obviously, I'm not advocating for plastic in this instance, but in the zero waste realm, we hyper-focus on packaging. And I think that can hold a lot of people back, is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, definitely.
So how can people learn more about Neobites, just kind of get some more resources from you guys, and also maybe try some of your treats or toppers?
Sure, yeah. So you can obviously head to our website, eatneobites.com, or follow along on social media, Eat Neobites. We're very active on Instagram, and we're slowly building up our TikTok presence as well. We recently launched on Amazon, so if you're an avid Prime shopper, that's a great way to find us. We're largely not in stores outside of the Austin area, but we're developing some partnerships. We're on Thrive Market, a handful of other e-commerce wholesale platforms. But I would say our website or social media is probably the best way. We do offer samples of our toppers and treats. You just have to pay for shipping. It's a great way to try our products risk-free and see how your dog likes them.
Awesome. Well, I will share all the links to your website and the socials in the episode notes. So if people want to check those out, you can go look there. But thank you so much for being on the show, Wesley. I learned a lot.
Awesome. Thanks for having me, Meg.
Thanks for listening. And if you like what you hear, let me know. Leave a review and be sure to subscribe so you never miss an episode. You can still find me on Instagram at outdoor.minimalist.book. Follow there for daily updates, other educational resources, and to help build an outdoor community with a shared goal to create a better outdoor space as we recreate.